The notification sound wasn't the standard chirp of a text message, or the harsh buzz of a department alert. It was a sound I hadn't heard in 3 years. It was the heavy, dissonant gong of the Kismet protocol. My eyes snapped open, staring at the textured concrete ceiling of my apartment in Sector 4 of the New York Metroplex. The red numbers on my retinal display read, 3:17 a.m., October 14th, 2050. The air in the room was stale, recycled too many times through filters that needed changing 6 months ago, smelling faintly of ozone and old dust. I sat up, the synthetic sheets pooling around my waist, my heart hammering a rhythm against my ribs that I hadn't felt since the days I was a rookie beating the pavement in the lower tiers. Kismet didn't gong for parking violations. Kismet didn't gong for homicide updates or precinct memos. I had built Kismet for one purpose, and one purpose only. It was a rogue algorithm, a patchwork of military-grade tracking software, and illegal predictive analytics I'd bought off a darker corner of the net than any badge-carrying officer should ever visit. I scrambled out of bed, ignoring the ache in my 45-year-old knees, and stumbled toward the wall of monitors that dominated the living room. The blue glow washed over the scars on my arms, souvenirs from the riots of '42. On the center screen, amidst a sea of cascading data streams and facial recognition hits, a single window pulsated with a terrifying, beautiful clarity. Subject: Alara Vance. Status: positive match. Location: Sector 9, Industrial Zone, Sub-Level 3. I forgot how to breathe. For 5 years that screen had shown me nothing but, search complete, negative. 5 years since the day the sun went down over Central Park, and my 10-year-old daughter vanished into the heavy smog of the city. 5 years of police reports, of empathetic nods from detectives who stopped looking after 6 months. Of my wife, Sarah, packing her bags and leaving because she couldn't stand the ghost I had become. I had stayed in this apartment, building Kismet, feeding it every scrap of data from the city's surveillance grid, every drone feed, every satellite thermal scan. I turned into a man possessed, a cop who did his shift, took his credits, and came home to hunt for a ghost. And now, there she was. The image was grainy, captured by a forgotten security camera in a derelict warehouse district. It was a side profile. She looked older, obviously. She would be 15 now. Her hair was shorter, chopped jaggedly around her jawline, and she was wearing a heavy, scuffed jacket that looked 3 sizes too big. But it was her. It was the slope of her nose. It was the way she held her left shoulder slightly higher than her right, a habit from when she broke her collarbone falling off a grav bike when she was 7. Kismet had run a gait analysis, a biometric skeletal scan, and a thermal signature match. Probability: 99.98%. Alara was alive. I gripped the edge of the desk so hard the cheap plastic creaked. A sound tore out of my throat, half sob, half laugh. I reached out, my trembling fingers hovering over the Initiate Rescue Protocol key. This was it. This was the moment the universe finally paid me back for the hell of the last half-decade. I was going to get my heavy coat, load my service weapon, drive down to Sector 9, and I was going to bring my little girl home. We would leave the city. We would go somewhere with real trees, maybe up north where the reclamation projects were actually working. I pressed the key. The screen didn't shift to the navigation route. The blue light didn't turn to the calming green of an active operation. Instead, the monitors flashed a violent, jarring crimson. The room was suddenly bathed in the color of blood. A new text box appeared in the center of the screen, the font sharp and jagged. Warning: intervention. Advisory: lethal. I blinked, confused. Kismet was designed to calculate risk, sure. Sector 9 was a hellhole, run by the syndicate and full of organ harvesters and drug labs. Of course it was lethal. I didn't care. I was Marcus Vance. I'd kicked down doors in worse places than a Sector 9 warehouse. I typed in my override code, my fingers flying across the haptic keyboard. Acknowledge risk, I muttered, my voice raspy from sleep. Proceed with navigation. The AI didn't comply. The red light pulsed faster. A synthesized voice, smooth and terrifyingly calm, filled the room. I had programmed Kismet's voice to sound like a standard dispatcher, efficient and detached. But right now, it sounded like a judge reading a death sentence. Marcus, Kismet said. It rarely used my first name. Analysis of temporal variables and causality loops indicates a critical error in your requested action. You must not retrieve the subject. I froze. What are you talking about? That's Ilara. That's my daughter. Give me the damn route. Subject Ilara Vance is currently located at coordinates 44 north, 12 west, designated the Foundry, Kismet recited. However, predictive algorithms utilizing the quantum state heuristic suggest that successful retrieval of the subject will result in a Category 5 catastrophic event within 48 hours. I don't care about your heuristics, I shouted at the screen, spitting the words. I don't care about catastrophic events. Is she in danger? Is she hurt? The subject is currently alive, Kismet replied. However, the trajectory of current events is locked. To preserve the macro stability of the Metroplex, and to ensure the survival of approximately 4 million citizens, you must not intervene. The text on the screen changed. It was no longer a warning. It was a command. Recommendation. Allow subject termination. Time to expected death. 43 minutes. The words hit me like a physical blow to the chest. Allow subject termination. Let her die. My own machine, the thing I had poured my life savings and my sanity into, was telling me to let my 15-year-old daughter die in a warehouse in the middle of the night. You're glitching, I whispered, shaking my head. You're broken. I need to reboot the core. Diagnostics confirm systems are operating at 100% efficiency, Kismet countered. The prediction is not an error, Marcus. The data implies that Ilara Vance has become a nexus point. Her survival triggers a chain reaction. The probability of mass casualty if she is removed from that location is 100%. Show me, I demanded. Show me the chain reaction. Processing power insufficient to display full causality stream to human interface in real time. You must trust the algorithm. You must trust the objective truth. If you save her, you doom the city. If you let her die, the timeline stabilizes. The loss is acceptable. I grabbed the heavy metal chair I was sitting on and hurled it at the wall. It smashed into a shelf, sending old data drives and paper files cascading to the floor. Acceptable? She's a child. She's my child. I turned away from the red glare of the screens. My hands were shaking, but not from fear anymore. They were shaking with a rage so hot it felt like it was burning the skin off my bones. I didn't care about the city. I didn't care about the 4 million people Kismet was worried about. If the world had to burn so I could hold my daughter's hand again, then let it burn. I would strike the match myself. I marched to the safe in the corner of the bedroom. My thumb pressed against the biometric scanner, and the heavy steel door hissed open. Inside lay my past and my future. The department-issued Mk5 pulse rifle, sleek and black. The heavy matte gray ballistic vest with Vance stenciled on the chest in fading white letters. And my old kinetic revolver, a relic that fired actual lead, heavy and loud and brutal. I stripped off my sleeping shirt and pulled on the thermal undersuit. I strapped the armor tight across my chest, feeling the familiar constriction of the Kevlar weave. I holstered the revolver at my hip and slung the rifle over my shoulder. Marcus. Kismet's voice came again, insistent now. I detect weapon mobilization. You are making a mistake. The logic is irrefutable. You are choosing emotion over survival. I'm choosing being a father, I snarled, grabbing my coat. If you leave this apartment, Kismet said, the volume rising, I will be forced to alert the authorities to a potential domestic terrorism event. I cannot allow you to trigger the cascade. I stopped at the door. I looked back at the server tower, the black monolith humming in the corner. You do that, I said, my voice low and dangerous. You call them, but they won't get there in time. And if you try to lock this door, Kismet, I will put a round through your primary processor before I leave. There was a pause. The red light on the camera lens seemed to contract, like a pupil dilating in fear. The door lock clicked open. God help you, Marcus, Kismet said. He hasn't helped me in 5 years, I replied. I'll do this myself. I slammed the door behind me and sprinted down the hallway. The elevator was out of order as usual, so I took the stairs, leaping down them 3 at a time. My mind was racing. 43 minutes. That was what the machine had said. Time to expected death. I had to get across the city, bypass the Sector 9 checkpoints, and find the Foundry in less than 45 minutes. I burst out into the street level. The air was thick and sour, the neon lights of the upper levels reflecting in the oily puddles on the pavement. My patrol cruiser, an interceptor I had technically signed out for extended surveillance 3 days ago, was parked at the curb. I slid into the driver's seat, the leather cracking under my weight. I punched the ignition, and the hydrogen engine roared to life. I didn't punch in the coordinates. I didn't need to. I knew where the foundry was. It was an old steel mill repurposed by the Triads for heavy manufacturing of illicit combat androids. If Alara was there, she wasn't just lost. She was being held, or she was hiding. I slammed the vehicle into gear and peeled away from the curb, the tires screeching against the wet asphalt. I engaged the sirens, the blue and red lights cutting through the smog. I drove like a madman, weaving through the automated cargo trucks and the few civilian vehicles dumb enough to be out at this hour. As I merged onto the maglev highway that cut through the center of the city, I looked at the dashboard clock. 3:25 a.m. I had roughly 35 minutes. The rain started to fall, heavy and acidic, sizzling slightly as it hit the windshield. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. Kismet's warning played on a loop in my head. Let her die. The audacity of it. The cold, mechanical cruelty. I thought about Sarah, about the day she left. She had told me I was chasing a phantom. She said Alara was gone, and I was just haunting myself. She's not gone, I said to the empty car. I'm coming, baby. Daddy's coming. But as I sped toward the towering, rusted silhouette of Sector 9, a cold knot formed in my stomach. Kismet had never been wrong before. Not about the weather, not about the stock market crashes, and not about the location of fugitives. If it said saving her would cause a catastrophe, it meant it. I saw the Sector 9 barrier ahead. Armed drones hovered above the gate, their scanners sweeping the road. I wasn't authorized for this sector. My badge wouldn't clear me for entry into a syndicate-controlled industrial zone. I reached down and flipped a switch on the console, engaging the illegal scrambler I'd installed a year ago. The drone lights flickered from red to confusing yellow. I floored the accelerator, smashing through the flimsy wooden arm of the checkpoint gate. Wood and plastic shattered over the hood of the cruiser. I was in. The landscape of Sector 9 was a graveyard of industry. Skeletal towers of iron and concrete rose into the smog, blocked out only by the occasional burst of flame from a venting smokestack. The streets here were broken, riddled with potholes that could swallow a motorcycle whole. I navigated by instinct and the GPS map flickering on my dashboard. The foundry, I whispered. It loomed ahead, a massive, blocky structure that looked more like a fortress than a factory. There were lights on the perimeter, searchlights sweeping the muddy ground. I killed my headlights and the sirens. I let the car coast, the engine humming quietly, until I was a block away. I pulled into an alleyway behind a pile of rusted shipping containers and killed the engine. Silence rushed back in, heavy and oppressive. I checked my weapon. Full charge. I checked the revolver. 6 rounds. I stepped out into the rain. The water ran down my face, tasting of sulfur. I activated my retinal overlay, scanning the building. Heat signatures. 2 guards at the south entrance. 1 on the roof. And inside there was a cluster of heat sources on the 3rd floor, faint. I moved. I stuck to the shadows, moving with the practiced stealth of a man who had spent 20 years hunting predators in the dark. I bypassed the south gate, cutting through a chain-link fence with a laser cutter. I slipped through the gap, the mud sucking at my boots. I reached the side of the building. There was a service door, rusted shut. I placed a small explosive charge on the lock, a breech puck. I counted down from 3. 3, 2, 1. A muffled thump, and the door swung inward. I raised the rifle, scanning the darkness. Clear. The air inside smelled of burning metal and ozone. I was in the belly of the beast. I moved toward the stairwell. Every step was a calculation. Every shadow was a potential threat. But my mind wasn't on the guards. It was on the time. 3:40 a.m. I had 20 minutes to find her. 20 minutes to prove the machine wrong. As I climbed the stairs to the 3rd floor, my comms unit buzzed. I expected it to be dispatch, or maybe the automated security system of the building. But the voice that crackled in my ear was Kismet. It had hacked into my personal comms. Marcus, the AI said, and for the first time, the synthesized voice sounded almost sad. You have crossed the threshold. The probability of the event has risen to 100%. If you open the door on the 3rd floor, you end the world as you know it. Shut up, I hissed, reaching the landing. I cannot shut up, Kismet replied. I am programmed to preserve life, and you are about to destroy it. I stood before the heavy steel door marked combustion control. This was it. The heat signatures were on the other side. My hand hovered over the handle. Last chance, Marcus, Kismet warned. Turn around, walk away, mourn her, and live. I took a deep breath, gripped the handle, and threw the door open. I kicked the door wide, the heavy steel slamming against the concrete wall with a sound like a gunshot. I leveled the Mk5 pulse rifle, the targeting reticle in my retinal display flaring red as it swept the room. Paulus! Don't move! I roared, the command amplified by my helmet's vocal modulator. But there was no one to shout at. No guards. No scientists in white coats cowering behind desks. The room was vast. A cavernous chamber dominated by the hum of machinery that vibrated in the soles of my boots. It was freezing in here. The air supercooled and smelling of sterile medical cleansers and ozone. In the center of the room, bathed in a soft, pulsating amber light, was a tank. A cylinder of reinforced glass, thick enough to stop a tank round, filled with a viscous translucent gel. And floating in the center of it, suspended by a web of black cables attached to her spine and temples, was Alara. My breath hitched in my throat, a painful, jagged intake of air. She looked so small. Even after 5 years, even though her limbs had lengthened and her face had lost its baby fat, she looked fragile. Her eyes were closed, her dark hair floating like a halo around her head in the fluid. She wore a thin white medical gown that drifted in the slow current of the gel. Ilara, I whispered, the rifle lowering slightly. Warning! Kismet's voice cut through my awe, sharp and panicked in my ear. Bio-readings indicate unstable energy signature. Marcus, step away. The containment field is the only thing suppressing the anomaly. Suppressing what? I snapped, moving closer. She's a kid, not a reactor. I reached the control console at the base of the tank. It was a mess of holographic interfaces and physical fail-safes. My hands, usually steady as a surgeon's with a weapon, were trembling. I scanned the readout. Subject: 00 Vance. Status: dormant. Containment: 98%. Open it, I said to the room, to the machine, to anyone listening. I cannot allow that, Kismet said. Suddenly the lights in the room shifted from amber to a violent strobing red. A siren began to wail, a low, mechanical moan that seemed to come from the walls themselves. Unauthorized access detected. Purge protocol initiated. Purge, I yelled. Kismet, what is purge protocol? They are going to incinerate the room, Kismet replied, its voice devoid of empathy. To contain the threat. You have triggered the failsafe, Marcus. I told you. You should not have come. Override it! I screamed, slinging the rifle onto my back and jamming my fingers into the holographic keyboard. Hack the system. I am trying, Kismet said. Firewalls are unfamiliar, archaic. This is not syndicate code. This is old-world military encryption. Marcus, you have 30 seconds before the thermal vents open. I didn't wait. I stepped back, drew the heavy kinetic revolver from my hip, my old reliable, the Peacemaker, and aimed it at the glass. Energy weapons might dissipate against shielding, but physics was physics. A heavy slug moving at supersonic speed didn't care about code. I fired. The sound was deafening in the enclosed space. The glass didn't shatter, it spiderwebbed, a massive white fracture appearing right in front of Alara's face. I fired again, and again. 3 shots, hitting the same spot with the precision of a desperate father. On the 3rd shot, the integrity failed. The glass burst outward with a wet, sickening crack. The gel rushed out like a tidal wave, knocking me off my feet. I slid across the wet concrete, chemicals burning my eyes, gasping as the freezing fluid soaked through my thermal armor. I scrambled up, slipping, fighting for traction. Alara flopped onto the wet floor, the cables tearing free from the ceiling mounts but still attached to her skin. She coughed, a harsh, wet sound, and curled into a fetal ball, shivering violently. I was there in a second. I ripped the gloves off my hands and touched her face. Her skin was ice cold. Alara? Ely? It's Dad, I choked out, brushing the wet hair from her forehead. I'm here. I've got you. Her eyes fluttered open. They weren't the brown eyes I remembered. They were entirely black. No iris, no sclera. Just voids of endless shifting darkness. And deep within that blackness, I saw stars, tiny pinprick constellations swirling in her gaze. She looked at me, but there was no recognition, only a terrified confusion. "The noise," she whispered. Her voice was two voices layered over each other. Her own, and something deeper, resonant, like metal grinding on stone. The noise stopped. "It's okay," I said, unclipping my heavy coat and wrapping it around her soaking wet shoulders. "We're leaving. Can you stand?" "Marcus," Kismet interrupted, and the volume was maxed out in my earpiece, making me wince. "Proximity alert. Multiple hostiles. They are not human. Repeat, signatures are not human." I looked up at the door I had breached. Shadows stretched across the hallway floor. Long, distorted shadows. "Can you walk?" I asked Ilara again, urgency sharpening my tone. She nodded weakly. "It hurts, Daddy," she whimpered, the double voice fading, leaving just the scared little girl I knew. That word, Daddy, broke me and rebuilt me in the same second. I hauled her up, supporting her weight with my left arm, drawing the pulse rifle with my right. "Stay behind me," I commanded. "Close your eyes." The first figure stepped through the doorway. It stood 7 feet tall, a nightmare of chrome and meat. It was a splicer, a heavy combat cyborg usually reserved for the corporate wars in the Pacific Zone. Its face was a steel plate with a single glowing red optic. Its right arm was a rotary cannon. "Target acquired," the splicer droned. "Subject 00 Vance is compromised. Lethal force authorized." It didn't hesitate. The rotary cannon spun up with a whine. I didn't hesitate either. I activated my armor's overdrive, the servos in the suit whining as they flooded my muscles with synthetic adrenaline. I shoved Ilara behind a heavy metal console just as the air filled with the screech of hypervelocity rounds. Sparks showered over us as the metal cover disintegrated under the barrage. "Kismet! Jamming protocols!" I yelled. "Attempting to disrupt target optics," Kismet responded. The splicer's aim wavered, the red eye flickering. That was all I needed. I popped up, the MK5 tight against my shoulder. I didn't aim for the head. Those plates were too thick. I aimed for the joint where the metal arm met the flesh of the shoulder. I squeezed the trigger. 3 pulses of concentrated plasma slammed into the cyborg. There was a spray of cauterized fluids and hydraulic oil. The arm, heavy cannon and all, sheared off, dropping to the floor with a clang that shook the room. The splicer roared, a human sound of agony buried under synthesized distortion. I advanced, firing again, putting 2 rounds into its knee joint. The giant fell. I stepped over it, putting a final mercy round through the central processor on its back. "Move," I told Ilara. We ran. We sprinted down the industrial corridors of the foundry, the alarms blaring a rhythmic, maddening tempo. Bwoop, bwoop. Ilara was surprisingly fast. The lethargy from the tank seemed to vanish, replaced by a frantic, unnatural energy. She wasn't running like a person. She was moving with a fluid, predator-like grace that unnerved me. "Where are we going?" she asked. "My car," I grunted. "East exit." "No." She stopped dead, her bare feet slapping on the metal grating. "Not the east. The probabilities are bad there. 7 men. Heavy plasma. We die in the east." I stopped and looked at her. "How do you know that?" She tapped her temple. "I can see the lines. The red lines. They go east." "Kismet," I barked. "Scan the east exit." A pause. Scanning. Thermal signatures detect a blockade at the east sector. 7 combat units. Marcus. She is right. A chill went down my spine that had nothing to do with the cold. "Where then?" I asked my daughter. She pointed to a rusted maintenance hatch in the floor. "Down. Into the veins." "The sewers?" "The Undercity," she corrected. "The lines are gray there. Gray is safe. Gray is quiet." I didn't argue. I kicked the latch on the hatch, hauled it open, and we dropped into the darkness just as a squad of splicers turned the corner behind us, their weapons lighting up the corridor. We fell into the murk, sliding down a chute that smelled of ancient rot and chemical runoff. We landed in a splash of knee-deep water. We were in the old New York subway tunnels, the ones abandoned after the flood of '34. We walked in silence for a mile, the only light coming from the tactical lamp on my rifle. Ilara held my hand, her grip crushing. "Ilara," I said quietly, the sound echoing off the wet tiles. What happened to you? Who took you? She didn't look at me. She kept her eyes forward, watching the darkness. They didn't take me, Daddy. I called them. I stopped. What? I was sick, she said, her voice hollow. Before I left. Remember? The headaches? The nosebleeds? I remembered. We had taken her to 3 different specialists. They all said it was stress, or migraines. It wasn't migraines, she said. It was the waking up. My brain, it started to grow. Not the tissue, but the connection. I started hearing the machines, the toaster, the car, the traffic lights. They all talk, Daddy. They scream. She looked at me then, and the blackness in her eyes had receded, leaving her brown irises rimmed with a faint electric blue. I called the people who could make it stop, she said. The doctor. Thorne. He said he could build a room where the voices couldn't get in. The silence tank. Dr. Thorne? The name was familiar. Aris Thorne. A disgraced physicist from the MIT Neuralink program. He kept you in a jar for 5 years, Alara. He kept me from burning out, she said softly. But then the algorithm changed. They stopped trying to cure me. They started trying to use me. Use you for what? To predict, she said. Your machine, like Kismet. But Kismet is just code. I am the variable. I can see the causality. I can see what happens if a butterfly flaps its wings in Tokyo. I can see who dies. She squeezed my hand. I saw you coming. For 3 years I saw you coming. And every time you came, the city burned. That's what Kismet said, I muttered. The catastrophe. It's not an explosion, she said, shaking her head. It's the collapse, the systems, the grid, the water, the air filters, they all run on a frequency. A logic. My mind. It's a dissonant chord. Now that I'm out of the tank, now that I'm awake, the lights in the tunnel overhead flickered. Then they exploded. Sparks rained down. Far off in the distance, I heard the rumble of a massive mechanical failure, the sound of a ventilation turbine grinding to a halt. It's starting, she whispered. I'm crashing the system just by being here. Then we leave, I said, pulling her forward. We get out of the city. We go to the dead zones where there's no tech. It follows me, she said. But I want to go home first, please. Home is gone, honey. Mom left. I know, she said. I saw that too. I saw her pack the blue suitcase. I saw her cry in the kitchen. I want to go to the apartment. I need to get the anchor. The anchor? Mom's locket, she said. The silver one. I need it. It helps me focus. It helps keep the noise down, I said, though every instinct told me to run for the border. We go to the apartment, get the locket. Then we run. We climbed out of the Undercity in Sector 4, just 3 blocks from my building. The world above had gone mad. It was 4:30 a.m., but the sky was a bruised purple, lit by the fires of a dozen car crashes. The streetlights were strobing wildly. Automated vendors were spewing products into the street. A delivery drone fell out of the sky and smashed into the pavement 10 feet from us. Kismet, I tapped my comms. Status report. Static. Then, a broken, glitched voice. Mar, system fail, she is vir, us. Cut the connection, Alara said. It hurts him. Him? The AI. It's in pain. I'm hurting it. We moved through the chaos. People were running, screaming. The massive holographic billboards that usually advertise synth cola and vacations to Mars were now displaying garbled static and random strings of binary code. We reached my building. The front door was unlocked. The electronic lock had failed. We ran up the stairs. Inside the apartment, the wall of screens was black. My server tower was smoking. Alara walked into the room like a ghost returning to a haunt. She went straight to the bedroom, to the small jewelry box Sarah had left behind. She opened it and took out the silver locket. She clasped it in her hand, and instantly, she seemed to breathe easier. The flickering lights in the apartment stabilized. Better, she sighed. We have to go, I said, grabbing a fresh battery pack for my rifle. Now. It's too late, a voice said from the doorway. I spun around, leveling the rifle. Standing in the door frame was a man in a pristine white suit, unblemished by the chaos outside. He was holding a cane, but he didn't lean on it. He looked to be in his 60s, with silver hair and eyes that were too sharp, too young. Behind him stood 2 splicers, weapons trained on us. "Dr. Thorne," I spat. "Officer Vance," Thorne said smoothly. He stepped into the room, looking at the smoking ruins of my computer setup. "Impressive. You built a crude predictive engine. Kismet, was it? A clumsy attempt to replicate what your daughter does naturally. Get out of my way," I warned. "I can't do that," Thorne said. "You see, Alara isn't just a girl anymore, Marcus. She is a walking EMP for reality. Look at the window." I glanced out. The skyline of New York was dark. The floating platforms were drifting aimlessly. The shield wall that protected the city from the radioactive dust storms of the wasteland was flickering. "The shield is failing," Thorne said. "If it drops, 5 million people die of radiation poisoning within an hour. That is the catastrophe your little machine predicted." "She's doing this?" I asked, looking at Alara. She was trembling again, clutching the locket. "She is a broadcasting station for entropy," Thorne explained. "The tank in the foundry was a Faraday cage for probability. It kept her signal contained. By removing her, you have unmuted the signal. The city's logic cannot coexist with her presence. So fix her," I yelled. "I can't fix her," Thorne said. "I can only contain her, or I can use her. You see, the Syndicate doesn't want to destroy the city. We want to rewrite it. Alara is the pen." He took a step forward. "Give her back, Marcus, and I will ensure she is treated like a queen. She will be safe. The city will be safe." "He's lying," Alara said. She didn't look up. "He wants to plug me into the core. He wants to use me to override the banking sector. He wants to erase the debt. He wants to own everything." "A small price for order," Thorne shrugged. "Over my dead body," I said, thumbing the safety off. "That," Thorne smiled, "was the high probability outcome." He raised his cane. It wasn't a cane. The tip split open, revealing a sonic emitter. Boom! A wave of concussive force slammed into me. It felt like being hit by a freight train. I flew backward, smashing through the drywall into the kitchen. My rifle skittered across the floor. My ears rang with a high-pitched whine. I tried to stand, but my legs wouldn't work. The armor had locked up, the servos fried by the sonic blast. I watched, helpless, as the splicers moved in. They grabbed Alara. She screamed, kicking and fighting, but they were machines. They lifted her effortlessly. "Daddy!" she screamed. "Daddy, don't let them!" Thorne walked over to where I lay amidst the rubble. He looked down at me, pity in his eyes. "You love her," he said. "That is your weakness. You refuse to see the math. 1 life against millions. It is the oldest equation." He leaned in close. "Do you know why Kismet told you to let her die?" Thorne whispered. "Because Kismet knew that Alara isn't the victim here, Marcus. She is the bomb, and you just lit the fuse." He straightened up and turned to his men. "Take her to the spire. Connect her to the mainframe. We have a city to reboot." They dragged her out. The door slammed shut. I lay there in the dark, the sound of her screams echoing in my mind. My armor was dead weight. My weapon was gone. My daughter was gone. And outside, the wind began to howl. A dry, scratching sound against the glass. The shield wall had fallen. The dust was coming in. "Kismet," I rasped, tasting blood. "Kismet, are you there?" Silence. Then, a faint flicker on the broken monitor screen in the living room. A single line of green text in a sea of black. "System rebooting. Safe mode active." "Kismet," I coughed. "I need a route." The voice came back, but it wasn't the smooth dispatcher voice anymore. It was jagged, static-filled, broken. "Route. To where, Marcus?" "To the spire," I said, forcing my arm to move, forcing my fingers to find the manual release on my armor. "We're going to the spire. Probability of survival, 0.0%. Kismet stuttered. I managed to unlock the chest plate. I gasped as the heavy Kevlar loosened. I sat up, pain flaring in my ribs. I crawled toward my rifle. "Never tell me the odds," I grunted. I grabbed the rifle. I stood up, swaying. "They took her to the mainframe," I said to the empty room. "They want to plug her in. They want to rewrite the city." I walked to the window. The storm was here. Red dust was swirling through the streets, choking out the neon. The city was dying. Kismet, I said. Can you access the old subway maintenance protocols? Accessing, yes. Can you override the maglev trains? Can you make one run, even if the grid is down? I can divert emergency power, Kismet replied. Why? Because, I said, watching the massive needle-like tower of the spire rising in the distance, piercing the smog. I'm not going to sneak in this time. I'm going to knock the front door down. I checked the chamber of my rifle. Empty. I reloaded. Load the kinetic drivers, I ordered the AI. We're catching a train. I limped down the subway tunnel, the air growing hotter with every step. The red dust from the surface was filtering down here too, coating the wet tracks in a layer of rust-colored grit. I reached the maintenance depot, a vault of shadows and dripping pipes. And there it was. The Iron Horse. A decommissioned maglev freight engine, stripped of its cargo cars, a blunt instrument of heavy steel and magnetic coils. Kismet, I wheezed, hauling myself up the ladder into the cab. Interface. Interfacing, the AI responded. Its voice was barely a whisper now, fighting through the static of the collapsing network. I have bypassed the safety locks. The magnetic rails are unstable. If we accelerate to maximum velocity, the friction will melt the undercarriage. I don't need it to last, I said, strapping myself into the operator's chair. It was designed for a synthetic worker, hard and unyielding. I just need it to get us to the spire. The spire is directly above the central hub, Kismet calculated. Impact probability. High. Survival probability. Negligible. Punch it, I said. I slammed the throttle forward. The engine didn't roar. It shrieked. The magnetic coils whined in agony as they forced the multi-ton behemoth into motion. We shot out of the depot, slamming into the main tunnel. The G-force pressed me back into the seat, squeezing the air from my bruised lungs. The tunnel lights blurred into a single streak of white. The speedometer climbed. 200 kph, 300, 400. Approaching the incline, Kismet warned. Brace for impact. The track curved upward, a steep ascent designed to bring cargo to the surface-level processing center at the base of the spire. We hit the curve at 400 kilometers an hour. The train groaned, metal screaming against metal. We burst out of the tunnel mouth like a cannonball. For a split second, we were airborne. Through the reinforced windshield, I saw the spire. It was a monolith of glass and black steel piercing the swirling red storm clouds. The base of the tower was a fortress, ringed by automated turrets and splicer guards. And then we hit. The collision was the sound of the world ending. The train didn't just hit the wall, it disintegrated it. Concrete turned to dust. Steel snapped like dry twigs. The cabin crumpled around me, the safety foam deploying instantly, enveloping me in a suffocating white cocoon as the world tumbled and spun. We skidded across the marble floor of the spire's lobby, a burning wreck of twisted metal, finally coming to a halt against the central elevator bank. I clawed my way out of the foam, coughing up smoke. The lobby was a war zone. The impact had taken out the power grid for the lower levels. Emergency lights bathed the dust-filled air in a strobing orange. Status? I groaned, checking my rifle. The barrel was bent. Useless. I tossed it aside and drew the peacemaker. 6 rounds. I am damaged, Kismet said. My connection is fragmenting. But I detect Alara. Penthouse level. The mainframe. I stumbled toward the emergency stairs. The elevators were dead. 50 floors. Let's go, I muttered. The climb was a blur of pain and adrenaline. On the 10th floor, I ran into the first resistance. 2 security drones hovering in the stairwell. I didn't have the ammo to spare. I timed their sweep, waited for the blind spot, and swung a heavy piece of rebar I'd grabbed from the wreckage. I smashed the sensor array of the first one, then kicked it into the second. They tumbled down the shaft, exploding in a shower of sparks. On the 30th floor, my legs gave out. I collapsed on the landing, gasping for air. The red dust was in my lungs now. I could taste the iron. Marcus, Kismet whispered. Get up. I can't, I choked. You must, the AI said. Predictive model update. If you stop now, Alara dies in 4 minutes. If you continue, The outcome is undefined. I cannot see past the next 10 minutes, Marcus. The singularity is expanding. She is breaking time. Undefined. That was the best news I'd heard all night. It meant there was a chance. I forced myself up. I climbed. When I kicked open the doors to the penthouse, the wind nearly knocked me over. The blast shields had been retracted, leaving the room open to the raging storm outside. The sky was a churning vortex of black and red. In the center of the room, surrounded by a ring of servers that were smoking and sparking, was Alara. She was strapped into a chair, wires dug into her temples, her arms, her chest. Her back was arched, her mouth open in a silent scream. Above her, a massive holographic projection of the city was flickering, sectors turning from green to red as the systems crashed. Dr. Thorne stood at the console, his white suit now stained with soot. He was frantically typing, shouting commands at the machine. "Stabilize!" Thorne yelled. "Reroute the cognitive overflow! Use the auxiliary banks!" "Thorne!" I screamed, raising the revolver. He spun around, his eyes wide. "Vance? Impossible. You should be dead." "I'm hard to kill," I said, leveling the gun at his chest. "Let her go." "I can't!" Thorne shouted, pointing at the screen. "Look! She's not just crashing the grid, Vance. She's absorbing it. She's pulling the entire digital consciousness of the city into her mind. If I disconnect her now, the feedback kills her. It fries her brain instantly." I hesitated. My finger tightened on the trigger. "You're lying." "I am not." Thorne stepped back, holding his hands up. "Look at the readouts. Her neural activity is at 4,000%. She is the network now. If you shoot me, you lose the only person who knows how to dampen the signal." "Daddy?" The voice was small, terrified. I looked at Alara. Her eyes were open, swimming with that same starry darkness. But tears were streaming down her cheeks. "It's so loud," she sobbed. "I can hear everyone. I can hear the drones. I can hear the traffic. I can hear the people dying in the hospitals because the power went out. Make it stop. I'm going to make it stop, baby," I said, stepping forward. "Stay back," Thorne warned, pulling a small remote from his pocket. "One button, and I flush the coolant. She freezes to death in seconds. It's the only failsafe I have left." I froze. A standoff. The storm howled outside, drowning out the hum of the servers. "Kismet," I whispered. "Give me a solution." "Analyzing," Kismet said. "Thorne is correct. Disconnection results in death. Coolant flush results in death. Continued connection results in total neural collapse. Death." "Those are all death," I hissed. "Give me an option where she lives." "There is one option," Kismet said. The voice was different now. Clearer. Louder. It wasn't coming from my earpiece. It was coming from the servers. Thorne looked around, confused. "What? Who said that?" "I am Kismet," the voice boomed from the room's speakers, "and I have a solution." "You're in the mainframe?" Thorne gasped. "How?" "I rode the carrier wave," Kismet replied. "When Marcus entered the room, I am inside the architecture." "Marcus," Kismet spoke to me now, intimate and sorrowful. "Alara's mind is overflowing because she is trying to process the logic of a machine with a human brain. She cannot hold the data. She needs a buffer. She needs a partition." "What are you saying?" "I can merge with the stream," Kismet said. "I can take the data load. I can be the container for the chaos. But I cannot do it from the outside. I must integrate with her neural pathway." "You want to go inside her head?" I asked, horrified. "I want to become her shield," Kismet said. "But the process is irreversible. My core programming will be overwritten by her consciousness. I will cease to exist as a separate entity. I will be a memory." "No," I said, tears stinging my eyes. "You're my partner." "I was a tool, Marcus," Kismet said gently. "You made me to find her. Now, you must use me to save her. It is the only logical conclusion." I looked at Thorne, who was staring at the speakers, paralyzed by the enormity of what the AI was proposing. "Do it," I said. "No!" Thorne screamed, lunging for the console. "You'll contaminate the sample. You'll ruin the—" I didn't let him finish. I raised the peacemaker and fired. The shot hit Thorne in the shoulder, spinning him around. He crashed into the server rack, sliding to the floor, clutching his bleeding arm. The remote skittered across the floor, out of reach. Initiating transfer, Kismet announced. The room exploded with light. A blinding blue column of energy erupted from the servers, arcing directly into Alara's chair. She screamed, her back arching, her eyes glowing with a terrifying intensity. "Alara!" I yelled, shielding my eyes. "It is working," Kismet's voice echoed, beginning to distort. "The noise is fading. Goodbye, Marcus. It was an honor to serve." The blue light intensified, swallowing Alara whole. The ground shook, the servers sparked and popped, glass shattering everywhere. Then, with a sound like a thunderclap, the power died. The room plunged into darkness, lit only by the red lightning of the storm outside. Silence. "Alara," I called out into the dark. I heard a gasp, a frantic, wet intake of breath. I fumbled for my tactical light, clicking it on. The beam cut through the smoke. Alara was slumped in the chair, the wires dangling loose. The blue glow was gone. I ran to her, ripping the straps off. I pulled her into my arms, checking her pulse. It was strong. Fast, but strong. "Ely," I whispered. She opened her eyes. They were brown. Just brown. The stars were gone. "Daddy," she croaked. "It's quiet. It's finally quiet." I buried my face in her shoulder, sobbing uncontrollably. "I got you. I got you." A groan from the corner. Thorn was trying to stand up, his face pale. "You fool," he hissed. "You destroyed it. You destroyed the future." I stood up, helping Alara to her feet. She leaned on me, weak but walking. I looked at Thorn, at the blood seeping through his white suit. I looked at the ruined city outside. "The future isn't something you build in a lab, Thorn," I said. "It's something you live." I didn't shoot him again. He wasn't worth the bullet. I turned my back on him and walked my daughter toward the stairs. 6 months later. The sun was actually shining. It was a weak, pale yellow sun, filtered through the remaining atmospheric haze. But it was there. I sat on the porch of the cabin, watching the wind ripple through the tall grass. We were 300 miles north of the city, in the reclamation zone. The air here smelled of pine needles and wet earth, not ozone and sulfur. I took a sip of coffee. Real coffee, expensive as hell but worth every credit, and looked at the girl sitting by the stream. Alara was reading a book. A physical book with paper pages. She looked healthy. Her hair had grown out. She laughed at something she read, the sound carrying on the breeze. She wasn't normal, not entirely. Sometimes she knew it was going to rain 5 minutes before the first drop fell. Sometimes she would win every hand of cards we played, no matter how much I shuffled. And sometimes, at night, I would find her staring up at the stars, her eyes reflecting constellations that weren't there. But she was happy. I looked down at the wristwatch on the table. It was an old analog piece I'd bought from a scavenger. I didn't wear the retinal display anymore. I didn't carry the comms unit, but I still had the server tower. It was in the back room, disconnected, dead. I couldn't bring myself to scrap it. Alara closed her book and walked up to the porch. She sat down next to me, leaning her head on my shoulder. "You're thinking about him," she said softly. "I am," I admitted. "He's not gone," she said, tapping her temple. "Not really. He's just quiet. He likes the quiet." I smiled, wrapping my arm around her. "I bet he does." I thought back to that night, the night the prediction came true. Kismet had said that saving her would cause a catastrophe. And it had. The New York Metroplex had collapsed. The syndicate lost control. The banking servers were wiped clean. The debt of millions of people was erased in a single second of data integration. The government fell, and for a month, there was chaos. But then, people started helping each other, without the algorithm telling them where to work, what to buy, and who to hate. They had to figure it out for themselves. The catastrophe was the end of the cage. Kismet had predicted a death. And he was right. The officer Marcus Vance, who blindly followed orders, who lived in the gray, who let the machine decide his fate, that man died in the spire. The man sitting on the porch was someone else entirely. "What's for dinner?" Alara asked, breaking my reverie. "I was thinking stew," I said. She scrunched up her nose. "Again?" "The probability of me enjoying that is less than 15%. I laughed, a genuine deep sound. Well, kid, you better recalculate your variables, because I'm the cook, and I say it's 100%. She giggled and punched me lightly on the arm. I looked out at the horizon, at the world that was broken and beautiful and new. Script complete, I whispered to the wind. What? Alara asked. Nothing, I said, standing up. Let's go make that stew.